Extinct. Adjective. A species, family, or other group of animals or plants having no living members. No longer in existence. Death sounds pretty permanent, but is it? 66 million years ago, the dinosaurs went extinct. But were they wiped out totally? We've been fed that story for ages. But turns out, those big guys might have had a secret survival plan. So, what does that mean for extinction? Extinction may turn out to be final, but as we'll discuss, there are many ways to go extinct, and possibly even a handful of ways to come back from the condition. In this video, we're going to explore all of these, discuss why prevention is far better than cure when it comes to extinction, and find out just how successful a species recovery can be when it's done right. And let's begin by talking about why extinction is actually a really good thing. Extinction is all about death, and death is a topic humans find hard to talk about, almost like it's morbid or something. Yet, death happens to all of us, and far from being a failure of life, it turns out to be a built-in feature, not a bug. For life to evolve, change has to happen, and this all requires death. Death is programmed into our genes as a biological necessity to help our species evolve over time so we don't all get wiped out by pandemics or Russian dictators. Extinction is a form of death that's a biological necessity. It plays a key role in evolution. Evolution isn't an intelligent process, which is why certain fanatics will never evolve to understand it properly. It's a process of random trial and error, and since it's random, the errors are almost as many as the trials. Think of it this way. A puddle of water in a hole in the ground fits the shape of the hole flawlessly. If you were to freeze this puddle and take it out as ice, you might even be able to convince someone it was crafted by an artist to fit the very dimensions of the puddle. But of course, it wasn't. The sky simply threw all the water it had across the whole area at random, and what went into the hole remained behind. What we don't see when looking at the puddle is all the water that didn't make it. And there was substantially more of that. This water represents the natural background extinction rate. All the species that didn't fit the ecosystem and disappeared into the drainage ditches of time. And these are a natural part of evolution. They're the collateral of the entire evolutionary experiment. We species need to go extinct. So, extinction is necessary. Does this make everything conservationists tell us wrong? No. While there is a healthy natural background extinction rate, there is also a rate of extinction on top of this, which we measure against it. Essentially, conservationists look at extinction rates overall, then subtract what we expect the extinction rate to already be, and what we're left with is the rate of extinction that we are responsible for. And sadly, it's a lot. 100 to 1,000 times more than the background, depending on which estimate you look at. This is why so many people and so much money is invested in conservation and even more expensive technological pursuits such as whether it's possible to de-extinct the animals we've lost. We're going to talk about all this, but first, let's look at how the dinosaurs, and others like them, came back from extinction. At the end of the Cretaceous, all the non-avian dinosaurs and their large reptilian kin did indeed go extinct. There is no sign of any of them surviving into modern times, despite what you might see on the Discovery Channel. But as more dinosaur fossils were found, some started to show signs of feathers, and with a closer inspection of older fossils, combined with improved imaging technology, the consensus emerged that not only were dinosaurs related to birds, but birds were dinosaurs. Specifically, theropod dinosaurs, the often predatory group that T-Rex belonged to. So, dinosaurs never truly went extinct, and are perhaps the most high-profile example of animals that came back from extinction. But this might be a pretty loose definition of coming back from extinction, so we'll increase the rigor by a level. Let's start with one that's even older than the dinosaurs. Lazarus taxa. Back in the Carboniferous and Permian, long before dinosaurs were invented, a lesser-known group of fishes dominated the ocean. They were the Sarcopterygians, and while they're not all that familiar to most of us today, they should be, because they're the group of fishes with a special shoulder that allow them to drag themselves out of the ocean and become every land vertebrate, including us. Their dominance in the ocean came to an end with the rise of other fishy animals, and one very tenacious species, known as the coelacanth, hung on until around 70 million years ago, until it disappeared from the fossil record entirely. Extinct, right? Wrong. This is an animal whose fossil dates back to over 410 million years ago, so it had a good run. But from the fossils on the ground, it was clearly extinct by the end of the Cretaceous. So when, in 1938, one was found alive in a fish market in South Africa, it threw up a world of questions. It turns out they'd just been keeping themselves very secretive. The coelacanth, and a handful of other species who've disappeared from the fossil record, only to show up very much alive, are named Lazarus taxa, and dinosaurs show up as examples of these too. The New Zealand swamp hen, known as the South Island takahe, was thought to have been hunted to extinction by the native islanders and then European settlers later on, and fossils were the only evidence of its existence until 1850, when a live one was found. Not long after, a second one showed up, but after that, nothing. The species was then presumed extinct for 50 years, until a population was found in a hidden valley and became an immediate focus for conservation. It's since been downgraded from critically endangered to vulnerable. So this one went extinct twice and still came back. Similar accounts of presumed extinction but later discovery of living specimens are true for several other animals, including the Victorian grassland earless dragon, Tympanocryptus pinguicola, who wasn't spotted between 1969 until some young ecologists stumbled upon one in 2023, and the New Guinea big-eared bat, Pherotus imogene, who casually went missing for 124 years. No biggie. But these again were animals that never truly went extinct, and are simply cases of gaps in the records. Or they were very good at hide and seek. So, is it possible for a species to totally disappear and come back again? Many people are trying. This brings us to aurochs. Ancient cave paintings in Europe depict a huge wild bovine that was clearly of huge significance to the prehistoric cultures and ecosystems of the time. The aurochs was the heaviest animal on land, and Julius Caesar himself compared it to a small elephant in size. Bulls could weigh over a ton and stand almost 2 meters at the shoulder. Unfortunately, the aurochs is no longer with us. Human hunting, the domestication of wildlife, and other early destructive human practices led to its slow demise, with captive specimens holding out until recently as the 1600s. But fortunately, domestic cattle owe a lot of their ancestry to the aurochs, and some believe this to be a key to bringing them back from extinction. The Taurus Project has already begun the process of selectively breeding domestic cattle until they look the part. But is this really the return of an extinct species? Breeding an animal that looks like an aurochs is certainly possible, but behavioral traits, gut microbiomes, mitochondrial diversity, and other such immeasurable quantities that make an organism what it is can't be selected for by sight. So you may end up with something that looks like an aurochs and moves like an aurochs, but you'll never know how similar it is to the original model. So backbreeding is, at least in this stage, a bit of a circus performance, and an expensive one at that. Ironically, it would be cheaper and likely more effective to release and manage wild cattle to take the role of the aurochs and allow the ecosystem to fit them in through generations of evolution. So, for now, the aurochs is another almost, but not quite, on the list of animals that came back from extinction. So, let's look at something a little more exciting. De-extinction. With the rate of human-caused extinction tearing ahead of the natural levels, things are looking dire. But not all trophic niches are created equally. Bringing back any species is a plus, but if we could bring back a keystone species, this would save a lot of species in turn. Typically, large predators are keystone species, as they hold together diverse communities beneath them, facilitating competition, opening niches, and, of course, keeping populations under control. Very large herbivores can do this too, especially by their effect on plant communities, which other organisms respond to. Essentially, a keystone species is a single species with the most influence over the ecosystem, and so it's only sensible that if we can de-extinct anything, we start with those. So, companies like Colossal are doing exactly this. Mammoths and thylacines are in their sights, and the plan is to sequence the entire genome and then find a close relative as a template, edit its genetic makeup to match that of the extinct animal, and try to produce something as close to it as possible. All the animals on the radar have gone extinct relatively recently, with the mammoth being the rare exception in that specimens have been found in the permafrost of Siberia with DNA from 11,000 years ago. And this is one of the many kickers in this approach. DNA has an upper bound for how long it can stay intact. Its half-life is only around 500 years, meaning that every 500 years that passes, half of the remaining DNA is broken down. Fossils of T-Rex bones, for example, are entirely mineralized and have no DNA in them at all, and even the infamous amber mosquitoes are way too far gone to recover. But even with a complete genome, the order of the DNA is important, and with only fragments to choose from, piecing it together is done by using the animal's closest relative as a template. So the outcome will not be identical to the extinct animal even in the best cases, and the tiniest of genetic alterations often have enormous effects on the animal's behavior or condition. So even with perfect technology, it will be impossible to sequence genomes from animals that lived too long ago. Even if Colossal succeeds in its mission, and this is a big if, for the vast majority of these extinct animals, either time or money will make their demise a permanent fixture. But what if the DNA sample is recent? Enter Bucardo. In 2003, scientists cloned a perennial ibex, also known as a bucardo, a subspecies of Spanish ibex that became extinct in 2000 when Celia, the last known individual, was tragically crushed by a fallen tree. However, scientists had taken tissue samples from Celia before her death, which were cryogenically frozen. Scientists attempted to clone Celia using a technique adapted from the cloning of Dolly the sheep. They extracted nuclei from Celia's cells and injected them into goat eggs that had been stripped of their own genetic material. The resulting embryos were implanted into hybrid Spanish ibex and domestic goats, but only one pregnancy was successful. A female Bucardo kid was born, but it had a lung defect and died shortly after birth. Despite the brief lifespan of the cloned calf, the perennial ibex cloning attempt was a significant scientific breakthrough, as it was the first de-extinction attempt, where a lost species or subspecies was resurrected. The success of the cloning was limited by the fact that the cloned calf had a genetic defect and died shortly after birth. Scientists have continued to explore the possibility of resurrecting the perennial ibex, but have faced challenges in finding viable cells and in overcoming the genetic defects that can arise during cloning. Which brings us to conclude. Extinction is final. What is done and will always be done. So, extinction is final, and we should perhaps work on preventing it in the first place instead. We can always look to the past to identify what needs to be done, but for conservation's sake, we must accept that it's impossible to reverse it. So, is de-extinction a waste of time? Yes and no. They certainly take large amounts of funding from idealists who love the appeal of bringing mammoths back. Whether this money would otherwise have gone into preventive conservation is up for debate, but it could be argued that the hype is not as deserved. But nobody can argue with the genetic research that is being pushed forward in the name of de-extinction. Research that conservation, medicine, and other disciplines will no doubt find very useful. But conservation is still substantially cheaper, well-established, and, so far, tons more effective than de-extinction. And prevention is cheaper still. To understand how easily nature can recover when we let it, we have to look to the oceans, and the animals that came back from the brink of extinction. It's always nice to end a video with some conservation successes, so here are some charming animals who were about to go extinct, but then didn't. Whales went through some very rough seas in the 1800s and 1900s. Some populations, like the Antarctic blue whales, were reduced by 99%. But as ridiculed as the movement was at the time, Save the Whales really worked to a T, and the majority of us now know better. Of all the species, humpbacks are rebounding the fastest. Having been reduced by around 95%, they are making a huge comeback in the wake of a more enlightened population. These incredible, mysterious, and highly intelligent cetaceans have now moved themselves into the IUCN's category of least concern, and all we have to do was stop hunting them. Crazy. They're even pushing close to pre-whaling levels by some estimates. This is an almost unprecedented recovery and a huge conservation success. Likewise, North Atlantic right whales are returning to a historically significant whaling area in southern New England, and blue whales, perhaps the most devastated of all whale species, are clawing their way back too, slowly but surely. And there's nothing more keystone in the ocean than whales. Many of these whales have been roaming the oceans, keeping things balanced since the time of Megalodon and beyond. Whale population recovery ticks all the boxes for optimal ecosystem conservation, and it costs us nothing. All we have to do is avoid disrupting what's already there. Neat. That's all for today, fossil heads. Before you start planning to revive your childhood pet, be sure to check out our previous videos where we dive deep into prehistoric weirdness, from ancient animals to wild evolutionary turns. As always, stay curious, fossil files.